Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent afternoons at the mall or gossiping about boys, she was running 5 miles through the desert heat or doing pull-ups on the rusty playground equipment behind the abandoned school. Her father, a former Marine who died in Afghanistan when she was 12, had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscle, it was about never giving up, no matter how hard life knocked you down. The town of Clearwater held only painful memories for Sarah. Every street corner reminded her of walking with her father to get ice cream on Sunday afternoons. Every American flag made her think of the folded triangle that sat on their mantelpiece, the one that had covered his coffin. Her mother, Maria, worked double shifts at the diner just to keep their small apartment, often coming home too exhausted to talk. Sarah learned early that if she wanted something in life, she would have to fight for it herself. High school was a blur of mediocre grades and constant restlessness. While her guidance counselor pushed her toward community college, Sarah's eyes were always drawn to the military recruitment posters that lined the hallway. She would stop and stare at the images of soldiers in combat gear, remembering the stories her father used to tell her about brotherhood, purpose, and serving something bigger than yourself. But it wasn't until she watched a documentary about Navy SEALs that something inside her clicked into place. The documentary showed the grueling training, the impossible physical demands, and the mental toughness required to earn the coveted trident pin. What struck Sarah most was seeing the few women who had attempted the program. Most failed, but those who made it through possessed something she recognized in herself, an unbreakable determination that refused to accept defeat. She knew in that moment what she wanted to do with her life. The Navy recruiter in the next town over was a weathered chief petty officer named Rodriguez, who had seen thousands of young people walk through his door with dreams of glory. When 18-year-old Sarah Martinez sat across from his desk and announced she wanted to become a Navy SEAL, he didn't laugh like she expected. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and studied her with sharp eyes that had seen combat in 3 different countries. "You know what you're asking for?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the weight of experience. SEAL training breaks grown men who've been athletes their whole lives. It's 6 months of hell designed to find your breaking point and then push you past it. Most people who start don't finish. Most people who finish barely survive it. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "My father always told me that the only easy day was yesterday. I'm not looking for easy." Rodriguez spent the next 2 hours explaining the reality of military life, the demands of SEAL training, and the fact that even getting a chance to try out for the program required years of preparation and exceptional performance in the regular Navy first. He told her about the physical standards, the academic requirements, and the psychological evaluations that would test every aspect of her character. By the end of their meeting, he was convinced she wasn't another starry-eyed kid chasing movie fantasies. Sarah enlisted the day after her high school graduation, leaving Clearwater with nothing but a duffel bag and her father's dog tags around her neck. Boot camp at Great Lakes Naval Training Center was her first real taste of military life, and she thrived in the structured environment. While other recruits complained about the early mornings and constant physical training, Sarah pushed herself harder than the instructors demanded. She volunteered for extra duty, helped struggling classmates, and never showed weakness even when her body screamed in protest. The physical standards for women in the Navy were lower than for men, but Sarah trained to exceed the male requirements. She ran faster, did more push-ups, and held her breath underwater longer than most of the men in her division. Her drill instructors took notice, particularly Petty Officer Thompson, a former SEAL who saw something special in the quiet girl from Texas who never complained and never gave up. "Martinez," Thompson called her aside one evening after a particularly brutal training session. "You've got something most people don't. But wanting to be a SEAL and being ready for SEAL training are 2 different things. You want my advice? Spend your first tour learning everything you can. Get qualified in as many specialties as possible. Make yourself indispensable. Then, when you're ready, the program will be there waiting." Sarah took his advice to heart. After boot camp, she requested assignment to a destroyer based in San Diego, knowing the West Coast would put her closer to the SEAL community. The USS Sullivan became her floating classroom, where she learned navigation, weapons systems, damage control, and leadership. She spent her off-duty hours in the ship's gym, pushing her body to new limits and studying everything she could about special operations. Her shipmates quickly learned that Sarah Martinez was not to be underestimated. During a training exercise off the coast of California, A simulated emergency required someone to enter a flooded compartment to manually operate a stuck valve. The space was partially submerged and would require holding breath for nearly 2 minutes while performing complex mechanical work. Several male sailors volunteered but failed due to the cramped conditions and murky water. Sarah stepped forward without hesitation. "Permission to attempt the task, sir?" The chief engineer looked skeptical. "Martinez, this isn't about proving anything. We need someone who can actually complete the mission." "With respect, Chief, I can complete the mission." She slipped into the dark water without showing any fear, her movements calm and controlled despite the chaos around her. The flooded compartment was a nightmare of twisted metal and floating debris, but Sarah navigated it like she had been born underwater. She located the valve, fought against the water pressure to turn it, and emerged victorious just as her lungs began to burn for air. Word of her performance spread throughout the ship, and soon throughout the fleet. Senior enlisted men who had initially seen her as just another female sailor trying to prove herself began to speak of her with genuine respect. She wasn't trying to show off or make a political statement. She was simply doing whatever needed to be done, better than most people could do it. Captain Williams, the ship's commanding officer, called her into his stateroom after the exercise. A 30-year veteran with deployments to every major conflict since the Gulf War, he had seen thousands of sailors come and go. But Sarah reminded him of the few truly exceptional individuals who had crossed his path. Those rare people who possessed both the physical capability and mental toughness to excel in the most demanding situations. "I've been watching you, Martinez," he said, reviewing her service record. "Your test scores, your physical fitness reports, your leadership evaluations. Everything suggests you're serious about pursuing special operations. I'm recommending you for the next pre-SEAL training course. It's voluntary, it's additional duty, and it will be the hardest thing you've ever done. You interested?" Sarah felt her heart race but kept her voice steady. "Yes, sir. Absolutely." Pre-SEAL training was designed to prepare candidates for the actual SEAL selection process. It was conducted during off-duty hours and weekends, turning every moment of free time into an opportunity for punishment. The instructors were active duty SEALs who volunteered to identify and develop the next generation of candidates. They had no interest in being encouraging or supportive. Their job was to find weaknesses and exploit them until only the truly committed remained. The program began with 50 volunteers from across the Pacific Fleet. They came from every rate and background: mechanics, cooks, intelligence specialists, and gunner's mates, all united by the dream of earning the Trident. Sarah was one of only 3 women in the group, and from the first day she could feel the extra scrutiny that came with breaking barriers. Instructor Phillips, a senior chief with 15 years in the teams, made the ground rules clear during their first meeting. "I don't care what you did before you got here. I don't care about your gender, your race, or your sob story about why you want to be a SEAL. All I care about is whether you can perform when everything is falling apart and your teammates are counting on you. Most of you will quit. That's not a threat. It's a statistical fact. The only question is whether you'll have the dignity to ring the bell yourself or force us to drop you for failure." The training began before sunrise with ocean swims in the frigid Pacific. The water off San Diego was cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes, but the candidates were expected to swim for miles while maintaining proper form and timing. Sarah's small frame worked against her in the water. She had less body mass to generate heat and had to work harder to maintain the same pace as larger candidates. But she had learned long ago that effort could overcome natural disadvantages. Every morning brought new challenges designed to test different aspects of mental and physical toughness. Underwater knot tying pushed candidates to their limits of breath control while performing complex tasks. Log races required teams to carry massive wooden beams across miles of soft sand, teaching the importance of teamwork and shared suffering. Combat conditioning combined martial arts, weapons training, and tactical scenarios that demanded split-second decisions under extreme stress. Sarah found herself constantly proving that she belonged. During log races, she was assigned to teams with the biggest, strongest candidates, forcing her to work twice as hard to keep up. During combat drills, instructors would specifically target her with harder scenarios and tighter time limits. Every day brought new attempts to break her spirit and send her back to regular Navy duties. But Sarah had spent her entire life preparing for this kind of challenge. Every painful memory from her childhood, her father's death, her mother's struggles, the poverty and uncertainty that had defined her early years, became fuel for her determination. When instructors screamed in her face about her inadequacies, she thought about the promises she had made to herself in that small Texas apartment. When her body wanted to quit during endless physical training, she remembered the documentary that had first inspired her dream. 3 weeks into the program, only 20 candidates remained. The attrition rate was even higher than normal, with several experienced sailors deciding they had underestimated the demands of special operations. Sarah not only survived but began to excel, consistently placing in the top 5 in most events. Her swimming times improved dramatically. Her combat scores were among the highest in the class, and her leadership evaluations showed a natural ability to perform under pressure. The other candidates began to see her differently. Initially, some had assumed she was there to make a political statement, or that she would receive special treatment because of her gender. But watching her push through the same punishments, meet the same standards, and exceed the same expectations gradually earned their respect. During particularly brutal training sessions, she became a source of motivation for struggling teammates, proving that size and strength were less important than heart and determination. Instructor Phillips pulled her aside after a night navigation exercise that had pushed the entire class to their breaking point. They had been awake for 36 hours straight, crawling through swamps and scaling cliffs while carrying full combat loads. Several candidates had been dropped for safety violations or failure to meet time standards. But Sarah had not only completed every task, but had helped 2 struggling teammates reach the finish line. "You're impressing people, Martinez," Phillips said, his usual harsh tone replaced by something approaching respect. "But impressing us in pre-SEAL is like winning a local boxing tournament. It feels good, but it doesn't mean you're ready for the championship fight. Real SEAL training is 10 times harder than anything we're doing here. The question isn't whether you can handle what we're throwing at you now. It's whether you'll still be standing when they really turn up the heat." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was both encouragement and warning. "I appreciate the honesty, Senior Chief. All I can promise is that I'll give everything I have. That's all any of us can do. But remember, in the real program, everything you have might not be enough." 2 years later, Sarah found herself standing on the beach at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, staring at the compound that housed basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. BUD SS. The 6 months of pre-SEAL training had been followed by advanced schools in diving, parachuting, and combat medicine. She had served with distinction on 2 deployments, earned commendations for her performance under fire, and finally received orders to report for the most challenging military training program in the world. The BUD/S compound was exactly as she had imagined, a collection of utilitarian buildings surrounded by obstacle courses, training pools, and the infamous grinder, where countless candidates had discovered their breaking points. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly to the west, its cold gray waters promising months of suffering for those brave or foolish enough to attempt earning the trident. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror as she realized that everything in her life had led to this moment. Class 157 assembled on the first Monday morning, with 143 candidates from across the military. They came from every branch of service and every walk of life: college athletes and inner-city kids, former Marines and Navy sailors, officers and enlisted personnel, all united by the desire to join the most elite military unit in the world. Sarah was one of 4 women in the class, a historic number that reflected the recent policy changes allowing female candidates to attempt SEAL training. Senior Chief Ramirez addressed the class with the same speech that had welcomed thousands of hopefuls over the decades. He was a 25-year veteran whose weathered face and scarred hands told the story of countless combat deployments. His voice carried absolute authority as he explained what the next 6 months would demand from each candidate. "Gentlemen and ladies, welcome to BUD/S. For the next 26 weeks, we will do everything in our power to convince you to quit. We will freeze you, exhaust you, frustrate you, and push you beyond what you believe are your limits. We will take everything you think you know about yourself and prove you wrong. Some of you will be injured. Some of you will fail academic requirements. Some of you will violate safety protocols. But most of you will simply decide that the pain isn't worth the prize." He gestured toward a brass bell mounted on a post at the edge of the grinder. That bell has been rung by thousands of candidates who discovered that wanting something and being willing to sacrifice everything for it are two different things. When you ring that bell, your suffering ends immediately. You'll get a hot meal, a warm shower, and transportation back to your previous unit. No one will think less of you. This program isn't for everyone. The training began immediately with physical screening tests that eliminated 15 candidates in the first week. Sarah passed easily, her years of preparation paying off as she exceeded the minimum standards in every category. But she quickly learned that meeting standards was only the beginning. The instructor's goal was to find each candidate's breaking point and then systematically attack it until they quit or proved they couldn't be broken. First phase focused on physical conditioning and water competency. The days began at 0430 with runs on the beach, often in full gear and boots that filled with sand and salt water. Pool competency training taught candidates to remain calm underwater even when their equipment failed, or instructors actively tried to drown them. Every session was designed to simulate the panic and confusion of real combat while testing the candidate's ability to think clearly under extreme stress. Sarah's biggest challenge came during pool week, when candidates were required to pass increasingly difficult underwater tests. The exercise called drown-proofing required students to swim 50 meters underwater, tread water for 5 minutes, and complete a series of underwater tasks while their hands and feet were bound. The instructors deliberately created equipment malfunctions, pulled candidates underwater at random intervals, and used every psychological trick to induce panic. During her first attempt, Sarah made it through the swimming portion but began to struggle during the treading water phase. Her smaller size worked against her in the pool. She had to work harder to stay afloat and consumed oxygen faster than larger candidates. As the 5-minute mark approached, she felt her lungs burning and her vision beginning to tunnel. The instructor, circling the pool like a shark, sensed her weakness. "Looks like Martinez is having some trouble," Instructor Thompson called out, loud enough for the entire class to hear. Maybe she should consider a different career field, something more suitable for someone her size. Sarah felt anger flare in her chest, providing a surge of energy that carried her through the remaining time. She completed the evolution successfully, but barely, and knew that she had revealed a vulnerability that the instructors would exploit mercilessly in future training. The psychological pressure intensified during second phase, which focused on land warfare and small unit tactics. Candidates learned advanced marksmanship, explosives handling, and patrol techniques while operating on minimal sleep and constant stress. The academic requirements were demanding, with complex tests on weapons systems, demolitions calculations, and tactical procedures. Failure in any area meant immediate dismissal from the program. It was during second phase that Sarah encountered her greatest enemy, not the physical challenges or academic demands, but the systematic campaign of harassment designed to break her will. Instructor Morrison, a bitter veteran who had opposed women in combat roles, made it his personal mission to prove that female candidates didn't belong in SEAL training. Morrison was subtle in his discrimination, never crossing lines that would result in official complaints, but finding countless ways to make Sarah's training more difficult. He assigned her to carry heavier equipment during field exercises, held her to stricter standards during inspections, and subjected her to more intensive questioning during academic reviews. His favorite tactic was public humiliation disguised as training. "Martinez, you're too slow setting up that machine gun," Morrison would shout during combat drills. "In a real firefight, your teammates would be dead while you're still fumbling with the equipment. Maybe you should stick to jobs more suited to your capabilities." The comments were always couched in terms of performance standards, making them difficult to challenge officially. But the message was clear. Morrison believed women had no place in special operations and would do everything in his power to prove his point. Sarah knew that complaining would only validate his arguments about women being too emotional or unable to handle criticism. Instead, she channeled the harassment into motivation. Every slight, every unfair assignment, every public humiliation became fuel for her determination. She began arriving at training sessions early to practice with equipment until she could operate faster than anyone in her class. She stayed up late studying until she could answer any question Morrison threw at her. She pushed herself harder in physical training until her performance was undeniable. The strategy worked, but at tremendous cost. Sarah began losing weight. she couldn't afford to lose, surviving on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine. Her body started breaking down under the constant stress and inadequate recovery time. During a particularly brutal field exercise, she collapsed during a 20-mile ruck march, falling unconscious from a combination of dehydration and exhaustion. She woke up in the base medical facility with an IV in her arm and a Navy doctor explaining that she was suffering from severe dehydration and would need at least 48 hours of recovery time. The news was devastating. Missing any training time usually meant automatic dismissal from the program. Sarah begged the doctor to release her early, promising she was fine and ready to continue training. "I've seen this before," Dr. Peterson said, reviewing her medical chart. "You're pushing yourself beyond reasonable limits trying to prove something. The question is whether you're trying to prove it to them or to yourself." "I'm trying to prove I belong here," Sarah replied honestly. "And what happens when you kill yourself trying to prove it? Does that advance your cause or set it back?" The doctor's words forced Sarah to confront an uncomfortable truth. Her approach wasn't sustainable. She was so focused on exceeding every standard and silencing every critic that she was destroying her body in the process. If she continued on the same path, she would either be medically disqualified or suffer a serious injury that would end her career. Dr. D. Peterson released her with a warning about the dangers of overtraining and a recommendation for modified duty. Sarah knew that accepting the medical recommendation would likely end her chances of completing Bud/S. Instead, she returned to training the next day, claiming to be fully recovered and ready for duty. Morrison was waiting for her with obvious satisfaction. Well, Martinez is back from her little vacation. Feeling better after your nap in the hospital?" "Yes, instructor. Ready for training." "We'll see about that. Since you missed yesterday's evolution, you'll need to make up the work. Report to the pool at 1900 for individual instruction." Sarah's heart sank, knowing that individual instruction with Morrison would be anything but educational. That evening, she found herself alone in the training pool with the instructor who had made her life miserable for months. With no witnesses and no other candidates around, Morrison dropped any pretense of professionalism. "I'm going to make this simple for you, Martinez," he said, his voice cold with contempt. "You don't belong here. You're weak, you're a distraction, and you're going to get real warriors killed if you somehow manage to graduate. I'm offering you one chance to quit with dignity before I demonstrate exactly how inadequate you really are." Sarah felt fear crawling up her spine but forced her voice to remain steady. "I'm not quitting, instructor." Wrong answer. What followed was the longest hour of Sarah's life. Morrison subjected her to every underwater harassment technique in the SEAL training manual and several that weren't officially sanctioned. He held her underwater until she nearly lost consciousness, repeatedly sabotaged her equipment during breathing exercises, and created scenarios designed to induce panic and failure. Sarah knew that she was being hazed beyond acceptable limits, but also knew that complaining would likely end her SEAL aspirations forever. The military's promise to investigate harassment complaints was undermined by the reality that whistleblowers often found their careers destroyed. She made a conscious decision to endure whatever Morrison threw at her and prove that she couldn't be broken. The harassment reached its peak during a training exercise called surf torture, where candidates were required to lie in the cold Pacific surf for extended periods, while instructors questioned their commitment and motivation. The exercise was designed to test mental toughness and was traditionally used to break candidates who were on the edge of quitting. Morrison ordered Sarah to remain in the surf long after other candidates were allowed to leave. As hypothermia began to set in and her body started shaking uncontrollably, he stood over her with obvious satisfaction. "Still think you belong here, Martinez? Your lips are turning blue, you're shaking like a leaf, and you can barely speak. This is what weakness looks like." Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes even as her teeth chattered violently. "I belong here, instructor." "Say it louder." "I don't think the fish can hear you. I belong here." Morrison leaned down until his face was inches from hers. "No, you don't, and before this program is over, I'm going to prove it to you and everyone else." The threat hung in the air as Sarah continued to shiver in the cold water. She realized that Morrison wasn't just trying to make her quit, he was actively working to destroy her chances of success through any means necessary. The situation had moved beyond normal training harassment into something much more dangerous. That night, as Sarah sat in her barracks room trying to stop shaking from cold and exhaustion, she faced the most important decision of her military career. She could file an official complaint against Morrison, knowing it would likely end both their careers and potentially close the door for future female candidates. She could quit the program and return to regular Navy duties, accepting that some barriers were simply too high to overcome. Or she could find a way to beat Morrison at his own game and prove once and for all that she deserved to wear the trident. As she stared at her father's dog tags in the dim light, Sarah made her choice. She wasn't going to quit, and she wasn't going to complain. She was going to finish what she started, no matter what it cost her. The breaking point came during Hell Week, the legendary 5.5-day ordeal that served as Bud and S's ultimate test of mental and physical endurance. Candidates would be pushed to their absolute limits with less than 4 hours of sleep total, constant physical training and psychological pressure, designed to separate those who truly belonged from those who merely wanted to belong. Sarah entered Hell Week already exhausted from months of harassment and overtraining. Her body weight had dropped to dangerous levels, and stress fractures in her shins caused constant pain that she hid from medical staff. She knew that any sign of weakness would be exploited by Morrison, who had promised to personally ensure she didn't survive the week. The week began at midnight on Sunday, with sudden chaos as instructors stormed the barracks, screaming orders and detonating training explosives. Candidates had minutes to dress and assemble on the grinder with full gear, beginning a week that would test everything they had learned about themselves and their commitment to becoming SEALs. "Welcome to Hell Week," Senior Chief Ramirez announced as the class stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness. "For the next 5 days, you will discover who you really are when everything comfortable and familiar is stripped away. Some of you believe you understand suffering. You're about to learn how wrong you are." The torture began immediately with surf passage, where boat crews were required to launch heavy inflatable boats through massive surf, navigate to designated points offshore, and return without losing equipment or teammates. The Pacific Ocean was particularly violent that week, with waves reaching 12 feet and water temperatures hovering near 50 degrees. Sarah's boat crew included some of the strongest candidates in her class, but she quickly became Morrison's primary target for criticism and additional punishment. When their boat flipped in heavy surf, throwing the crew into the churning water, Morrison singled her out for blame despite the fact that multiple crews had experienced similar problems. "Martinez, get over here," Morrison screamed as the crew dragged their boat back onto the beach. "Your poor paddle technique just put your entire team at risk. Drop and give me 50 push-ups in the surf." Sarah obeyed without question, dropping into the cold water as waves crashed over her back. The push-ups were nearly impossible to complete properly in the unstable sand and rushing water, but refusing to continue would mean immediate dismissal from the program. As she struggled to complete the exercise, Morrison continued his psychological assault. "Look at this, people. This is what happens when we lower standards to make everyone feel included. Real SEALs don't endanger their teammates because they lack the physical strength to do their job properly." The public humiliation was designed to turn her classmates against her, suggesting that her presence in the program was compromising their chances of success. Sarah could see doubt creeping into some of their faces as exhaustion and stress made everyone more susceptible to Morrison's manipulation. The harassment escalated throughout the week as Morrison found increasingly creative ways to break Sarah's spirit. During medical inspections, he questioned her fitness for duty and suggested she be medically disqualified for stress fractures that were common among all candidates. During mealtimes, he criticized her eating habits and claimed she lacked the metabolism to maintain strength during extended operations. "Martinez isn't eating enough to sustain herself through real combat operations," Morrison announced loudly during one meal. "How is she going to carry her share of the load when she can barely maintain her own body weight?" Sarah forced herself to eat even when nausea from exhaustion made food repulsive. She knew that Morrison was documenting everything, building a case for her dismissal based on performance standards rather than obvious discrimination. Every bite of food, every completed exercise, every small victory became crucial evidence in her fight to stay in the program. The worst moment came during a night evolution called Around the World, where boat crews were required to paddle their inflatable boats around Coronado Island in darkness, while navigating by compass and avoiding commercial shipping traffic. The exercise typically took 6 to 8 hours and tested navigation skills, teamwork, and the ability to function effectively while completely exhausted. Sarah's crew was making good time despite the challenging conditions when Morrison appeared in a chase boat, ostensibly to provide safety oversight, but actually to create additional problems for her team. As they approached a critical navigation checkpoint, Morrison began shouting contradictory instructions that confused the crew and caused them to miss their turn. "Martinez, you're supposed to be navigating. Where exactly do you think you're going?" Morrison's voice carried clearly across the dark water. "Following the bearing you gave us, instructor," Sarah called back, knowing that Morrison had deliberately provided incorrect information. "Wrong. Your incompetence just cost your team 30 minutes. Turn around and start over." The extra paddling was devastating to a crew already operating on the edge of complete exhaustion. Sarah's teammates began to show signs of serious fatigue as they fought against wind and current to return to their starting point. She knew that Morrison was hoping to cause a medical emergency that would eliminate multiple candidates and demonstrate the dangers of lowering standards. As they struggled through the additional distance, one of Sarah's teammates, Petty Officer Jackson, began showing signs of severe hypothermia. His paddle strokes became erratic, his speech slurred, and his body temperature dropped to dangerous levels. Sarah realized that continuing the exercise could result in serious injury or death. "Instructor Morrison," she called across the water, "request permission to signal for medical assistance. Jackson needs immediate attention." "Negative. Complete the evolution as assigned." Jackson knew what he was signing up for. Sarah faced an impossible choice. Following orders meant potentially watching a teammate suffer permanent injury or death. Disobeying orders meant certain dismissal from the program and probable court-martial for failure to follow lawful commands. She looked at Jackson, who was now barely conscious and unable to maintain his position in the boat. Without hesitation, Sarah activated her emergency beacon and signaled for immediate medical evacuation. Morrison's fury was immediate and volcanic as rescue boats converged on their position and medical personnel began treating Jackson for severe hypothermia. "Martinez, you just violated a direct order and compromised this training evolution. Report to my office immediately after this exercise concludes." Sarah knew her SEAL career was probably over, but watching Jackson receive life-saving medical treatment confirmed she had made the right choice. Some things were more important than personal ambition, and protecting teammates was the most fundamental value of Special Operations Forces. The confrontation in Morrison's office was everything Sarah had expected and worse. With no witnesses present, Morrison dropped any pretense of professionalism and revealed the depth of his hatred for women in combat roles. "You self-righteous little girl," he snarled, his face red with anger. "You think you just saved someone's life? You demonstrated exactly why women don't belong in special operations. You're too emotional, too weak, and too quick to panic when things get difficult." "Jackson was dying," Sarah replied quietly. "I couldn't watch a teammate die because of pride. Jackson was being tested. Every SEAL faces life-threatening situations. It's what separates us from regular military. But you couldn't handle watching a real warrior push through adversity, so you called for help like the weak little girl you really are." Morrison began pacing behind his desk, building toward what Sarah sensed would be the final assault on her military career. She remained at attention, forcing herself to show no emotion even as he dismantled everything she had worked for. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison continued. "You're going to be charged with failure to follow orders during a training exercise. Your performance evaluations will reflect your inability to function under stress and your tendency to compromise mission objectives for emotional reasons. You'll be dropped from training and transferred to a desk job where you can't endanger real warriors." Sarah felt something break inside her chest but kept her voice steady. "Is that all, instructor?" "No, that's not all. I want you to understand something before you disappear into whatever meaningless career the Navy finds for failed SEALs. You never belonged here. You were a diversity experiment that went exactly as predicted. You're physically inadequate, mentally weak, and emotionally unstable. The fact that you made it this far doesn't prove anything except that we've lowered standards to accommodate people who have no business wearing the uniform." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to destroy not just Sarah's career, but her fundamental sense of self-worth. Morrison was trying to convince her that every instructor who had believed in her was wrong, every achievement was meaningless, and every sacrifice had been pointless. But as Morrison continued his verbal assault, something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down, Sarah felt a cold clarity settle over her mind. She realized that Morrison's hatred revealed more about his own insecurities than her capabilities. His need to destroy her proved that he saw her as a genuine threat to his worldview, not the weak pretender he claimed she was. "Are you finished, instructor?" Sarah asked when Morrison finally stopped talking. The question seemed to surprise him. He had expected tears, arguments, or defensive explanations. Instead, he faced a young woman who seemed completely unmoved by his attempt at psychological destruction. "What did you say?" "I asked if you were finished. Because if you're done trying to convince me that I'm worthless, I have something to say." Morrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're in no position to make demands, Martinez." "I'm not making demands. I'm stating facts. First fact, Jackson is alive because I made the right choice. Second fact, you deliberately put him in danger to try to break me. Third fact, every day you've spent trying to prove I don't belong here has actually proved the opposite." Sarah stepped forward, abandoning her position of attention for the first time in months. "You want to know what separates real warriors from pretenders? Real warriors protect their teammates even when it costs them everything. Real warriors do the right thing even when no one is watching. Real warriors don't use their authority to bully people who can't fight back." Morrison's face went white with rage. "How dare you? I'm not finished," Sarah interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "You're going to drop me from training, and you're going to ruin my career, and you're going to feel good about it because you'll think you've proved your point. But you're wrong about something important. I'm not here because standards were lowered. I'm not here because of politics or social experiments. I'm here because I earned it, the same way every other candidate earned it." She pulled her father's dog tags from under her uniform shirt, holding them where Morrison could see them clearly. "My father died serving this country. He taught me that some things are worth any sacrifice. Being a SEAL was my dream, but being worthy of wearing this uniform is more important than any personal ambition." Morrison reached for his phone, probably to call security, but Sarah wasn't finished. "You can destroy my career, but you can't change what happened here. I've proven that women can meet your standards, handle your training, and make the same sacrifices you demand from men. The next woman who walks through that door will have an easier time because I was here first. That's worth more than any career." Sarah came back to attention, her voice returning to the formal tone required of candidates addressing instructors. "Permission to return to training, instructor." Morrison stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strange mixture of admiration and frustration. "You're dismissed, Martinez. Report to your barracks and await further orders." Sarah executed a perfect about-face and marched out of the office, her head held high despite knowing she had probably just ended her military career. But as she walked across the grinder where she had spent months proving herself, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with her choices. Sarah spent the next 48 hours in limbo, confined to quarters while the Bud/S Command investigated the incident during Hell Week. She watched through her window as her former classmates continued training without her, knowing that each passing hour made it less likely she would be allowed to rejoin the program. The dreams that had sustained her through years of preparation seemed to be slipping away because she had chosen to save a teammate's life. On Wednesday morning, she was ordered to report to Captain Harrison's office. As the commanding officer of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, Captain Harrison had ultimate authority over every candidate's fate. Sarah had only seen him from a distance during formal ceremonies, but his reputation as a fair and demanding leader was legendary throughout the special operations community. Captain Harrison was reviewing a thick folder when Sarah entered his office and reported as ordered. He gestured for her to sit, which surprised her. Most disciplinary meetings were conducted with the accused at attention. The captain's office was filled with mementos from a distinguished career spanning 3 decades of special operations, including combat deployments to every major conflict since the 1990s. "Petty Officer Martinez," Captain Harrison began, looking up from her file. "I've been reading about your performance in this program, and I have to say it makes for interesting reading. Your test scores are in the top 10% of your class. Your physical fitness evaluations show consistent improvement despite several minor injuries. Your leadership evaluations from other candidates are exceptional. And yet, Instructor Morrison has recommended you for dismissal." Sarah remained silent, knowing that anything she said could be used against her in whatever proceeding was about to unfold. "I've also read the incident report from Hell Week," the captain continued. "According to Instructor Morrison, you violated a direct order when you called for medical assistance during a training evolution. He states that your action demonstrated poor judgment and an inability to function under stress." Captain Harrison closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with the same intensity she had seen in other senior SEALs, the look of someone who had learned to read people's character under extreme circumstances. "I've been in command of this training program for 4 years, Martinez. In that time, I've seen hundreds of candidates face impossible choices between following orders and doing what they believe is right. Most people think military training is about blind obedience, but they're wrong. We need people who can think independently when the situation demands it." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope, but remained cautious. Military justice could be unpredictable, and she knew that Captain Harrison might simply be establishing rapport before delivering her punishment. "Tell me about your decision to call for medical assistance," the captain said. "I want to hear your perspective on what happened out there." Sarah chose her words carefully, knowing that her response would determine her future. "Sir, Petty Officer Jackson was showing clear signs of severe hypothermia. His core body temperature was dropping rapidly, and he was becoming unresponsive. I assessed that continuing the training evolution posed an immediate threat to his life." "And Instructor Morrison ordered you to continue the exercise?" "Yes, sir. He specifically denied my request for medical assistance and directed us to complete the evolution as assigned." "So you had to choose between following orders and protecting a teammate?" "Yes, sir." Captain Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "What did your SEAL training teach you about that choice?" Sarah felt her heart racing as she realized this might be a test rather than a disciplinary hearing. "Sir, SEAL training taught me that the mission comes first, but never at the expense of preventable casualties. We don't leave teammates behind, and we don't watch them die when we have the power to save them." "Even when it means disobeying orders?" "Sir, I believe there's a difference between unlawful orders and lawful orders that have become dangerous due to changing circumstances. My judgment was that the original order had become unsafe due to Jackson's deteriorating condition." Captain Harrison picked up another folder from his desk, this one much thinner than Sarah's training record. "I've also been reviewing Instructor Morrison's performance evaluations and incident reports. It seems this isn't the first time his training methods have been questioned." He opened the folder and began reading from several documents. Multiple complaints about excessive harassment of minority candidates. 2 previous incidents where candidates required medical attention after training exercises he was supervising. Several reports of unprofessional conduct that fell just short of actionable offenses. But Sarah remained silent, but felt a growing sense that this meeting was not proceeding as Morrison had intended. "I've also spoken with Petty Officer Jackson," Captain Harrison continued. "He credits you with saving his life. The medical staff who treated him confirmed that he was approaching critical hypothermia and could have suffered permanent injury or death if treatment had been delayed much longer." The captain stood and walked to the window overlooking the Bud/S compound, where candidates could be seen struggling through physical training in the afternoon heat. "Martinez, I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave this room. The integration of women into special operations has been one of the most challenging changes this community has faced. There are people who oppose it for legitimate reasons, physical standards, unit cohesion, and operational effectiveness. There are also people who oppose it for illegitimate reasons, prejudice, tradition, and fear of change." He turned back to face Sarah directly. "The question I have to answer is whether the incident during Hell Week was caused by legitimate training concerns or illegitimate discrimination. Based on my investigation, I believe it was the latter." Sarah felt her breath catch but forced herself to remain composed. "Instructor Morrison has been relieved of his training duties and reassigned to other responsibilities," Captain Harrison announced. "His conduct during Hell Week violated multiple protocols and endangered candidates under his supervision. He will face appropriate administrative action for his failures." The news was stunning, but Sarah knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Morrison's removal didn't necessarily mean she would be allowed to continue training. As for your status in the program, the captain continued, I'm faced with a difficult decision. You missed several days of Hell Week, which normally results in automatic dismissal. However, those days were missed due to circumstances beyond your control and directly related to your instructor's misconduct. Captain Harrison returned to his desk and pulled out a new set of orders. I'm offering you two options, Martinez. First, you can accept reassignment to your previous unit with a clean record and commendable evaluations. Your conduct during this incident will be noted favorably, and your military career will not be negatively affected. Sarah felt her stomach drop, knowing that the second option might not be what she was hoping for. Your second option is to restart Bud/S training with the next class, Class 158, which begins in 6 weeks. You'll start over from the beginning, but you'll retain all the knowledge and conditioning you've gained from this experience. The offer was better than Sarah had dared hope, but she knew there had to be conditions attached. Before you decide, Captain Harrison continued, you need to understand what restarting means. You'll face many of the same instructors, many of the same challenges, and potentially many of the same prejudices you've already encountered. The difference is that next time, you'll be doing it under intense scrutiny from people who want to see whether this incident was an anomaly or a pattern. Sarah considered the implications carefully. Restarting training meant months of additional suffering with no guarantee of success. It meant facing new classmates who might view her as the candidate who got special treatment after failing her first attempt. It meant enduring the whispers and speculation that would follow her throughout the program. But it also meant getting another chance to achieve the dream that had driven her entire adult life. Sir, I'd like to restart training with Class 158, Sarah said without hesitation. Captain Harrison smiled for the first time during their meeting. I thought you might say that. But before you commit, there are some things you need to know about how this will work. He pulled out another document and handed it to her. These are the conditions for your restart. First, you'll be held to the same standards as every other candidate. No special treatment and no allowances for your previous experience. Second, you'll be monitored closely by the training staff to ensure there are no further incidents. Third, any violations of protocol or training standards will result in immediate dismissal with no appeal. Sarah reviewed the conditions carefully, noting that they were stricter than normal candidate requirements, but not unfair. There's one more thing, Captain Harrison said. The Navy is implementing new policies for monitoring training practices and protecting candidates from harassment. You'll be part of the first class to train under these new protocols, which means your experience will help determine how future classes are conducted. Sarah realized that her restart wouldn't just be about earning the trident. It would be about proving that the changes in policy were necessary and effective. I understand, sir. I accept the conditions. Captain Harrison stood and extended his hand. Welcome back to Bud/S Martinez. Don't make me regret this decision. Sarah shook his hand firmly. I won't, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. As she left Captain Harrison's office and walked across the grinder toward her new temporary quarters, Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that her career wasn't over. Gratitude for a second chance. Anxiety about facing the challenges ahead, but underneath it all was a determination stronger than anything she had felt before. She had survived Morrison's campaign of harassment and emerged with her integrity intact. She had saved a teammate's life and been vindicated for her decision. She had proven to herself and others that she belonged in the special operations community, not because standards had been lowered, but because she had met them honestly. The next 6 weeks would be preparation time, healing her injuries, regaining lost weight, and studying everything she could about advanced training phases. When Class 158 assembled for their first day of training, Sarah Martinez would be ready to prove that her first attempt hadn't been luck or lowered standards. She would prove that she was exactly where she belonged. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the same beach where her journey had nearly ended, but this time she wore the gold trident pin that marked her as one of the most elite warriors in the world. Class 158 had started with 137 candidates and graduated 23. Sarah was not only among the survivors, she had finished in the top 5% of her class and earned recognition as the honor graduate for leadership and teamwork. The graduation ceremony was attended by senior military officials, proud families and media representatives documenting the historic achievement of the first women to complete SEAL training. Sarah's mother, Maria, had flown in from Texas wearing her late husband's dress uniform medals, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter receive the recognition that had cost so much to earn. Admiral Peterson, the Naval Special Warfare Commander, personally pinned the trident to Sarah's uniform during the ceremony. He was a legendary figure in the SEAL community, with combat experience spanning 4 decades and personal knowledge of every significant special operations mission since the 1980s. His presence at the graduation emphasized the importance of this historical milestone. Today marks not just the completion of training for these exceptional individuals, Admiral Peterson addressed the crowd, but the beginning of a new chapter in naval special warfare. These men and women have proven that excellence recognizes no boundaries other than dedication, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for their teammates and their country. Sarah felt the weight of the trident against her chest, knowing that it represented more than personal achievement. Every challenge she had overcome, every barrier she had broken, every moment of doubt she had conquered, had been part of a larger struggle to prove that merit should be the only measure of who deserves to serve in special operations. Her second journey through BUD/S had been completely different from her first attempt. The new policies implemented after Morrison's removal created a training environment that was still brutally demanding, but free from the systematic harassment that had nearly destroyed her career. Instructors pushed every candidate to their limits, but they did so fairly and professionally. Senior Chief Rodriguez, who had replaced Morrison as the primary first-phase instructor, established the tone from day one. He was a decorated veteran with multiple combat deployments who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. "I don't care about your race, your gender, your background, or your politics," Rodriguez had told Class 158 during their first formation. "All I care about is whether you can do the job when lives are on the line. Some of you will prove you can. Some of you will prove you can't. The training will reveal which category you belong in." Sarah's classmates knew her story. It was impossible to hide the fact that she was restarting after her previous class. Some viewed her with suspicion, wondering if she had received special treatment to get a second chance. Others respected her determination to return after facing what everyone knew had been unfair treatment. The doubt disappeared quickly as Sarah's performance spoke for itself. Her previous experience gave her advantages in understanding the training progressions and mental challenges, but she still had to meet every physical standard and complete every evolution successfully. Her leadership abilities became apparent during the team-building exercises, where her natural instinct to help struggling teammates made her invaluable to crew performance. During second-phase land warfare training, SAS-CAS rates technical knowledge and tactical understanding consistently earned top scores on written examinations. Her marksmanship ratings were among the highest in the class, and her performance during combat scenarios demonstrated the kind of clear thinking under pressure that instructors looked for in future SEALs. But it was during third-phase diving operations that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The underwater training that had nearly broken her during her first attempt became her strongest area. Months of additional preparation had improved her breath-holding capacity and underwater confidence to exceptional levels. She consistently volunteered for the most challenging dive profiles and never showed the slightest hesitation even during equipment failure scenarios. The final graduation exercise was a culmination event designed to test everything candidates had learned over 6 months of training. Called Warrior Exercise, it was a multi-day field problem that combined elements of all 3 training phases into a realistic special operations mission. Sarah's squad was tasked with conducting a simulated hostage rescue in an abandoned industrial facility. The exercise required precise planning, coordinated movement, live-fire shooting, explosive breaching, and medical evacuation under time pressure and instructor harassment. Every aspect of the mission was graded, and failure in any element could result in dismissal from training even at this late stage. As squad leader for the exercise, Sarah was responsible for mission planning and execution. She spent hours studying the facility layout, analyzing entry routes, and coordinating with supporting elements. Her plan was thorough and innovative, incorporating lessons learned from real special operations missions she had studied during her preparation time. The execution was flawless. Sarah's team moved through the facility with precision, cleared rooms systematically, and rescued the simulated hostages without casualties. When unexpected complications arose, in equipment failures, deliberately introduced by instructors, the squad adapted quickly under her leadership. The entire operation was completed ahead of schedule and earned the highest marks possible. Senior Chief Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside after the exercise debrief. Martinez, that was textbook special operations leadership. You kept your people focused, adapted to changing conditions, and accomplished the mission despite multiple obstacles. That's exactly what we want to see from future team leaders. The praise meant more to Sarah than any official recognition because it came from someone who had seen thousands of candidates attempt the same challenges. Rodriguez's approval was based purely on performance, not politics or historic significance. As graduation day approached, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a small Texas town to the pinnacle of military special operations. Every setback had taught valuable lessons. Every challenge had revealed hidden strengths. Every moment of doubt had been overcome through determination and the support of people who believed in her potential. The morning before graduation, she visited Petty Officer Jackson, who was recovering at the base hospital after being injured during advanced training with his own class. He had suffered a serious parachuting accident that would likely end his SEAL career, but his spirits were high as he congratulated Sarah on her achievement. "You saved my life during Hell Week," Jackson said, gripping her hand firmly. "Not just from hypothermia, but from giving up on myself. Watching you refuse to quit no matter what they threw at you showed me what real toughness looks like." "You would have done the same thing," Sarah replied. "Maybe, but you actually did it, and that made all the difference. I'm proud to know the Navy's first female SEAL." Jackson's words reminded Sarah that her achievement belonged to more than just herself. Every woman who had dreamed of serving in special operations, every person who had been told they didn't belong, every individual who had faced discrimination and refused to accept it, they all shared in this moment. After the graduation ceremony, Sarah was approached by a young girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The child had somehow convinced her parents to bring her to witness history, and her eyes were wide with excitement as she looked up at the woman who had just shattered one of the military's most enduring barriers. "Are you really a Navy SEAL?" the girl asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Yes, I am," Sarah replied, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "My mom says girls can't do that job because it's too hard." Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams and the people who had told her they were impossible. "Your mom is wrong about that. Girls can do any job if they're willing to work hard enough and never give up on their dreams." The little girl's face lit up with possibility. "Maybe I could be a Navy SEAL someday too. Maybe you could. But remember, it's not about being a girl or a boy. It's about being tough enough inside to keep going when everything gets difficult." As Sarah watched the child run back to her parents, chattering excitedly about her new career plans, she understood the true significance of her achievement. The trident pin was important, but the example she had set was more valuable. Every barrier broken made it easier for others to follow. Later that evening, Sarah stood alone on the beach where she had suffered through countless training evolutions, looking out at the Pacific Ocean that had tested her limits and forged her character. She thought about her father who had died believing that service to country was the highest calling. She thought about her mother who had sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities she never had. She thought about all the instructors who had believed in her potential and pushed her to achieve it. But mostly, she thought about the future. Her graduation from Bud/S was just the beginning of her journey as a Navy SEAL. Advanced training awaited, followed by assignment to an operational team and deployment to wherever the nation needed special operations capabilities. The real test of her abilities would come in combat, where the training would be put to its ultimate purpose. Sarah Martinez had proven that she belonged among the most elite warriors in the world. Now she had to prove she could excel in the role she had fought so hard to earn. The gold trident on her chest represented not the end of a struggle, but the beginning of a responsibility that would define the rest of her military career. As she walked back toward the base, Sarah felt complete confidence in her ability to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. She had survived everything the Navy could throw at her and emerged stronger. She had faced discrimination and harassment and responded with dignity and determination. She had proven that courage and competence were not defined by gender, but by character. The small girl from Texas who had dreamed of becoming a warrior had finally arrived at her destination. But Sarah knew that every ending was also a beginning, and her real adventures as a Navy SEAL were just getting started.